Commissioner Bach?
Here.
Commissioner Baca?
Here.
Commissioner Hawley?
Here.
Commissioner Chorin?
Here.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer?
Here.
Commissioner Lemke?
Here.
Commissioner Stoker?
Here.
Commissioner Parrish?
Here.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer?
Here.
Alderman Strelchuk?
Here.
Mayor Worth?
Here. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from July 22nd. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The next item is a consent agenda, and I'll read these off briefly. We have an application from John and, excuse me, please, people? Excuse me, if you're going to talk, please do so in the room over there. Please not in here. Thank you. The applicant seeking approval to vacate a public road reservation that extends across the property at 10961 North Wauwatosa Road. We also have SMJ International for American Tower that's seeking a site plan amendment to allow a backup generator at a cell tower at 8320 West Freistadt Road. We have Wilmer Wetzel who's seeking a certified survey map to divide a property at 13104 to 13106 North Granville Road. We have the Mequon Nature Preserve that's seeking to build 2 greenhouses at 9011 West Donjas Bay Road. And we have Alliance Bible Church that's seeking a site plan amendment to allow for additional parking at 13939 North Cedarburg Road. Does anybody want to remove anything from the consent agenda? Hearing no plan commissioners wanting to do that. Is anybody here for any of the items that are under the consent agenda on the agenda? I'm assuming not. So do we have a motion on, you are?
Applicant.
Somebody, no?
Applicant.
Okay. You don't want to talk. Don't defeat victory, defeat from the jaws of victory. Do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You are approved. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to suspend rules and move the last agenda up to the beginning, if that would be appropriate now, just so everyone can get out of here sooner.
Is there a second?
And just be, and to be clear, I'm talking about item
I would
4C.
suggest, I mean, you can do that, but the other item should be relatively quick, I think. And there are people here for those items also. But that's up to the commission.
I already
We
said
do have a
that,
motion
so-
and a second.
We got
If you,
discussion.
yeah, you can, there is discussion for a point of order, or a motion to suspend the, no, there's not. There's no discussion on a motion to suspend the rules. If you could call the roll, please.
So close.
Sure, sorry. Commissioner Baca?
Here.
No,
Aye. Aye.
Oh,
Here, too.
this is a motion to suspend the rules.
yeah, they have to vote, right?
Yeah.
Could you
Okay.
call the agenda?
Commissioner Schaefer?
I seconded it, and I'm still going to vote no, because I didn't realize that the other items are going to be that short. Sorry, Brian.
Commissioner Parrish?
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker?
No.
Commissioner Lemke?
No.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer?
Aye.
Commissioner Chorin?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawley?
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk?
No.
Mayor Worth?
No. What does that make the, I didn't count
3,
votes.
4, 5, isn't it?
I think the first one, Baca was not a vote.
This is not personal to that item. It's simply
It's
that
5
the-
noes.
the other item should be very quick, and I'm guessing that
Doesn't
the other
pass.
item will take a long time, and we don't want to make a few people wait.
That's
That
fine.
failed, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
5.
Okay. So the first item is a public hearing on Missing Links Golf Course. The applicant seeking authority to build a miniature golf course at 12590 North Port Washington Road. Do we have a motion to go into public hearing?
Move to go into public hearing?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is anybody here wanting to address the, this item to the commission? Hearing none, can we motion to close the
So moved.
hearing?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Do we have a motion on the, for approval?
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes. The next item is the Ozaki County Planning and Parks Department. The applicant seeking fill permit approval to allow for the excavation of fill at 9104 West Mequon Road. Is there, the staff want to make a few short comments, please? Okay.
That all moved very fast. So this item before you, the applicant is requesting Plan Commission approval of a minor request for filling and excavating for the property at 9104 West Mequon Road for the Little Menominee River Ecosystem Restoration Project. It's a wetland and stream restoration project. They're anticipating a significant amount of haul-off. As part of the conditions of approval, we would recommend that only county and state roads be used for that level of haul-off. The city staff did review the plans, and they do conform to our standard specifications.
I would note, and I do know that there's at least one person wanting to speak. The council did review this, effectively the same plan, and impose some conditions on the drainage way this is on the rest of the site. One person is registered to speak. That's Irene Meyer at 11234 Farmdale Road. If you'd like to step forward and.
My name is Irene Meyer.
Oops, can you pull the microphone down so we can hear? Sorry.
My name is Irene Meyer. My property borders is just west of the proposed dumping of fill.
Sorry, thank you.
And I'm concerned that my property, my backyard will be flooded if they're going to do any fill. Now, is there going to be, my question is, are they going to bring in more fill
Will
from a different area to fill it?
I'll have staff address your questions after. Is that your only question, or do you have other questions or
Well, I'm
comments?
concerned that my backyard will be flooded.
Okay.
And I'm against it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
If you could address that issue,
Sure.
please.
This is actually the excavating side of our filling and excavating permit, so they are hauling material out of the site versus hauling material into the site.
Okay. They're not bringing in more fill.
They're taking it out.
They're taking it out. Oh, okay. I just got the card that it concerns my property, and I thought, well, I check in what they're doing.
Well, we appreciate that, and we always appreciate people coming and making sure that they're informed and asking questions.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Any discussion on the commission? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The next item on the agenda is Concordia University, the applicant seeking building and site plan approval for a dome over the football field. I'll get to comments in just a minute, but I'll have staff make a short report.
Sure, I'm not sure if the applicant's here.
Is the applicant here? I'm sorry, please step forward and introduce yourself when you get up to the table. Thank you.
No, I don't.
I'm Dr. Rob Barnhill, Director of Athletics at Concordia University.
I'm Dave Fenton with Horizon Building Systems, here to support them on technical information.
A couple of things, you really have to pull it forward because I had trouble hearing you also.
Dave Fenton with Horizon Building Systems, here for technical information.
Okay, for this item and the following item, just so that people know what how we're going to do this, because there's lots of people here tonight, and there's lots of, I don't think there's only one or two who've registered to speak on this item, but we'll follow the same format. And that is, I'll ask staff to give a short report. We'll take public comments. If there are some questions raised in the public comments that staff should address, I'll ask them to do so. The applicant will be allowed to make some comments. And again, if staff has any response to that, then we'll go to the commission for questions, not for debate at that point, so that we're all on the same page as far as information. Then at that point, we will turn it over to the commission for a discussion, debate, a motion and a decision. So that's how we'll handle each of the next two items, so that we're clear. Staff.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a request for an athletic dome over the football field at Concordia University. I have the site plan up on the screen to show the location of the dome itself. Some of you may recall in 2014, the applicant was in front of us for a consultation for a dome. That was actually 72 feet in height, which exceeded our code requirement. That was going to be generally in the softball, soccer field location. Now they've moved the location over the football field, and they've been able to reduce the height to 52 feet, which complies with our code with regards to height. The applicant did provide some sightline renderings in the packet, which I'll scroll to show how the dome will look from different vantage points throughout the campus and in the adjacent public way. This is probably one of the most visible locations. This will be coming down Lakeshore just before you get to the parking structure. This is probably one of the most visible locations of it. As you can see, it's still pretty well set back from the road and screened pretty well. This is a shot from the Highland Road Lakeshore interchange. As you can see it just above the building, this location right here. And then this is a location of, I believe this is on Lakeshore Drive a little bit further. It shows it just kind of above the tree line. In terms of the structure itself, staff feels this is a better location than the previous one. Most of it is blocked by the parking structure. One of the things that in our request for information with regard to the structure that we're not able to get into the packet was this issue of illumination. And I did ask them to provide me what that type of look of the structure would be at night, and apparently there's an issue with there's two different types of structures, so I wanted the Planning Commission to weigh in on it. There is basically an opaque structure which shows it as all one big, like what you see here, it's white. There's also, I believe I have a picture of it here, which shows, so this is how it would be illuminated at night, this one below here. And then there's also one that is what's called the skylight view, which is this one here. So this area in the middle allows natural light in so they can use it in the daytime and not have to illuminate it, but there will be a little bit more lights seen from the exterior. The applicant at the time of the report was not sure at this point which one they were looking to go towards, but I wanted to at least inform the Planning Commission that there is an issue with that, and if there's a preferred option, it would be up to the commission to make a recommendation with regard to that. Overall, staff is supportive of the dome. We also addressed the issue of noise. They're relatively quiet for the inflation of the dome, and to keep it inflated, we put the condition on it, as we do with many of our noise-related structures, that they can't exceed 65 decibels at the property line based on the location of the equipment and the distance to the property line. I don't see that being an issue whatsoever in this case. So overall, we are supportive of the request, and we recommend approval according to the conditions in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I believe only one person's registered to speak, and that's Dan Bradley at 344 West Bonnewall Road. Mr. Bradley?
Yes, thank you. I hope I don't come across as a curmudgeon tonight because I'm going to speak on two of the subjects. But as far as the Concordia football dome goes, I reviewed the packet also, and I thought it was interesting that all the renderings didn't include renderings from Lakewood, Northwood, or the Lakeshore shared driveway where the people live. So we don't know what the view would look like from there, especially in the winter time when there are no leaves on the deciduous trees. And you all know that we lost all of our ash just about, which were blocking that view too. So I think one should see a rendering of how it would look from our neighbor Chuck Reynolds' house, which is probably the closest to the dome, or the two people, the Hubners and the Mikalskis, on the shared driveway off of Lakeshore. So you didn't take any from the north or the northeast, like from Mary Ellen Barasha's house on the end of Lakewood Drive. Anyway, my wife and I have lived almost 40 years in the neighborhood, so we were there before there was a CUW Mequon. It was a convent. It was really nice then. I think one of the questions I had, because I didn't see it in the packet, was about the light bleed through the fabric at night. And I think we just addressed that a little bit, but I don't know, were those things in the packet of the alternatives and the amount of light bleed?
No, we did not get that from the applicant in time to get it in the packet, that's
Because
why.
that is a problem, which I'll address in just a second. The other thing was that the noise level of the fan was supposed to be 65 decibels. I believe, and I'm not sure, but I believe that was supposed to be the same level of noise that would come from the Capco Park at the lot line. And guess what? I can hear every word of the announcer at Capco Park, and I'm almost a mile away. So 65 decibels is about as loud as I'm speaking right now to you. Anyway, Concordia, and I like Concordia. Pat Ferry's a neighbor of mine, but I tell you what, it's taken a lot from us in the neighborhood. It's taken all the stars and the dark at night. Last night, I almost took a picture and brought it. I took a picture looking south towards Concordia from Bonnewell, my house, and the sky was completely lit up from the parking lot lights and so forth. So they've taken our dark skies. They've taken our quiet summer evenings when we used to sit outside and not have to listen to a baseball game and a loud announcer trying to rev up a crowd that even is louder. And they also took our quiet local traffic that was on Lakeshore. Students don't use Lakeshore. Well, baloney, they don't use Lakeshore. There's a constant stream. My wife and I walk Lakeshore and clean Lakeshore every morning, and we're passed by hundreds of cars usually. So they've taken all that from us, and do they also need to take our sight lines? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. The next, if we could hear any response from staff as far as sightlines?
I mean, again, being that tall, you will see it. There was one sightline, which I believe is from the north. I don't think so. I believe this one.
Excuse me, it's Mr. Zader's turn to
I
talk.
believe this one right here is from the north.
Excuse me, Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley, we didn't interrupt you. Please don't interrupt Mr. Zader. Thank you.
I mean, the applicant provided this sketch, but I do believe this is from the north, I would think, or in that general area. There's trees along that, many of them are deciduous, but there's also a very substantial row of arborvitae that screen the football field right now. But you will, I mean, there will be some visibility of the top of it as it shows from some of the other vantage points as well. I mean, it is 52 feet in height, so you will see it. But this probably is a better picture to kind of, it's probably hard to see from here, but as you can see, this is basically a wall of hedgerow that separates Concordia's north property line. And you can see in the front ones, and it runs the length, there are a double row of arborvitae that are substantially higher. Now they're not 50 feet, but they're probably in the 25 to 30 foot range at least, so.
Gentlemen, comments, your presentation?
Yes, thank you for your time and consideration tonight. I've been at Concordia for 20 years. I've been the athletic director for 18. And in the packet, I provided a little bit of a rationale as to why we feel this is important to us and needed at this time. And I'll reflect back on that for those that may not have had a chance to peruse the document. But we have seen a growth in residential students, and we've seen a growth in our athletic department in terms of teams and participants. When I started 18 years ago as the AD, we had 15 varsity sports and 300 student athletes. Today, we have 32 sports teams and 700 student athletes. We have literally outgrown our ability to provide our campus, our students, both student athletes and non-student athletes, with recreational play space. We have one large indoor recreational space, and that's our field house. And the field house was purpose-built to be a volleyball, basketball, and indoor track facility. We recently added the Catalyst Sports Training Center, which was purpose-built for baseball and softball batting and pitching. There are other sports that can take advantage of it, and there are other groups on campus that take advantage of it, but its footprint of 6,000 square feet prohibits us from allowing any of our larger field sports the opportunity to practice and prepare adequately. In the winter months of January, February, March, when we experience the overlap between winter sports and spring sports, we have 10 competing organizations trying to get into that field house. Our student athletes practice from 5 to 7 a.m. and then again from 3 to 11 in the evening. The middle of the day is reserved for classroom time and physical education classes. But that 11 o'clock ending time for practice isn't ideal for the student athletes, and it's not ideal for the non-student athletes that don't have a place to go, shoot hoop, or run around. This dome would allow us the opportunity to extract more value out of our current facility by putting it up seasonally. We'd put it up in October, take it down in early April. That would remove virtually all of our field sports from the field house. So baseball, softball, men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse would all go outside into the dome. It would also then allow intramurals and campus recreation sports to expand their offerings inside the dome, as well as allow the current programs and sport offerings from campus rec and intramurals, give them a chance to play pre-11 p.m. at more traditional times of 8, 9, and 10. We feel like this is the best compromise for us. This is the most economical opportunity that we have to be able to provide the space that we need. The timing of it is important to us because our current football turf field is 12 years old on a 10-year warranty. So although there's a little bit more life left in it, we're on the verge of having to replace that turf. And if we're going to add the bubble, we would want to go ahead and put the containment system around the field at the same time. It wouldn't make much sense to put a new field in and come back and rip it out and do this after the fact. So for these reasons is why we feel this is important and critical to address our current size and scope of the athletic department and the student body, but also to allow us potentially to grow the program with the addition of more sports and more students.
Thank you. To the commission.
Mayor.
Yes, questions?
A couple of questions. Jack, the height of it compared to the garage, it's taller, but does that diagram illustrate what the difference is?
The height of the dome to the structure?
Yeah.
Yeah, the dome is, I believe, about 10 feet higher. I believe that structure is around 42 feet. So it's about 10 foot in difference.
Okay. And with regards to the bleeding, the light bleeding out of it, did I understand that at 10 o'clock, system shut down over there, the lighting would be turned off, or?
I did not say that.
Okay. In the report, it talks about activities till 10 p.m.
It speaks to the fact that we're currently practicing indoors till 10 o'clock.
Would that mean then that at that time the lights would be shut down, or is there a point in time that the lights would be shut down?
It certainly wouldn't go past midnight. We wouldn't staff it that late.
Okay.
Other questions? Mr. Bach?
So, and I understand the need. I work with high school athletics, and certainly this is a good use of a field, a turf field in the winter months. Marquette has a similar one. The difference is you're in a residential area here, and I think the height that's taller than a 4-story hotel. I think so. You're getting up there, and so that was my question that Mr. Chorin said too. Is there any kind of conditional use permit or with Concordia on some of these things so that you can put some of those kind of
Well, the property is zoned institutional, so they're a permitted use. So there is no conditional use for any of the activities. The only one that's somewhat unique is the Chinooks Stadium. That actually went to Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals dictated that the Common Council should weigh in on it and allowed them to add some use restrictions to the Chinooks Stadium. So that's the only use at Concordia that has any limitations with regard to use.
So even when you put a new facility, something like
it's-
this in, you cannot put any
It's
conditions
permitted,
on-
you can make recommendations on the building and site plan approval. So again, if there was a concern about illumination, you could require it not to have, allow it to have the natural skylight, so that would reduce the amount of illumination on it. But in terms of hours of operation, it's an institutional use, and whatever's allowed through that institutional district is allowed for this type of use. I will say that the dormitory, as well as the business building, and I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but the pharmacy school, those are about 52 feet in height as well. I mean, they know their height limit, and when they design a building, they typically try to get right to that level, so.
And this isn't taller than a four-story hotel, is it?
It depends on the hotel and how it's designed. I mean, the one that we had for a consultation, they did what they could to bring it below the 52 feet, but originally it was higher than that when they originally submitted a design for it.
Alderman Strelchak.
I'll be honest, I struggle with this item. I mean, I was a college athlete. I see exactly where your needs are, and friends with a couple guys that played lacrosse over there, and I know the need to play indoors and get going in spring, and I support the use in the space. That being said, I also struggle with the neighbors' concerns. Commissioner Chorin did ask about, what time light cutoff would be. I think if we do approve something, we should have a time for light cutoff. I just think it should be noted so everyone's on the same page. There's no misunderstanding. If you've got an event or two and you know that's coming, again, we'd be open to talking about that. But I wouldn't want to see it illuminated until 1 a.m. 3 out of the 4 nights a week, just even for cleaning or whatever. I mean, lights would definitely need to be dimmed.
What I suggested was that we'd have questions, then a motion, then discussion. Is there a question here?
Yeah, there's a question. Mechanicals, again, is there a decibel rating outside of the box on the mechanicals? That was one of my concerns. Kind of prefacing why I'm asking the questions. So the mechanicals were one of my questions. The mechanicals are being shown in between the garage and the athletic dome, correct? There are 2 light blue boxes on page 125 of our packet.
Correct.
And there's a dome storage container that is further north that would not be mechanicals and noise making, correct?
Correct.
It's green up there, but it's blue on mine, sorry.
Seasonal, sorry. The dome storage container is seasonal, and it doesn't have to be there. If we want to put it on, if we want to store it off-site, for instance, we could put it in a tractor trailer and take it off-site for when it's down. That was just shown as if there was going to be a placeholder for a place to hold it during the off-season.
But the mechanicals, what's the decibel level outside of the mechanical box?
The mechanicals are 65 decibels at the units themselves, and then that diminishes every 30 feet, it goes down 5 decibels. So at the property line, it would be substantially less than 65 decibels.
And then it hits the tree line as well, so it wouldn't be as loud as.
Yeah, and from a,
Some of the neighbors were concerned about.
your last speaker was correct. Speaking voice is about 60 decibels. A vacuum cleaner is 70 decibels, so it's in between those two from a practical standpoint. We use what are called VFD drives, so they actually ramp up down like pressing the gas pedal on a car. You only have as much demand as you need to fill the dome. So most of the time, it's actually well below that. It's not a constant status of 65 decibels.
Yeah, it's more of a hum anyway, too. And then which design were you anticipating that you'd prefer to move forward with? The one where you can let in skylight, or the one that would be opaque?
Well, the skylight gives you more options, but if that's going to be a sticking point, then I think we should let him speak to the light trespass issue, and maybe it's not as big of an issue for you as it may feel like it is. But if it is, and the opaque version is what is going to be required to make this passable, then that's the route we would go. But if you could speak to the light trespass.
Yeah, so the two versions we talked about were the skylight version where the light is at the very top. And I'm very sensitive to this subject also because I actually lived 3 blocks from a dome that was at a public high school. And so I actually lived these same things. And, you know, the benefit to the community is tremendous, but as a neighbor, you always have concerns about what a school brings to your area. The amount of light brought into it is less than parking lot lights will bring, the other things will bring when it's a skylight. If they wanted to go fully opaque, now that we use LED lights, it's really not as big a deal. It used to be the skylights were really needed from an energy standpoint to meet the energy code. Anymore, we can go LED lighting. When we use the skylight, the lights that are on the interior of the dome are actually off to the side of the skylight, so there's no direct shining through the fabric of the lights. It's just a very dim glow.
And could you address just generally the opacity if you,
Yeah, it's, you know, I try to be straightforward on this. When I go to take a picture of it, I can never get enough light to get a picture of the opacity at night. It's very low when you're seeing it. The actual amount of lumens that go out are about 1/10 of what they are inside of a dome from a lighting standpoint. You can see the bright spots on the one that shows with the entry structure around it. That's actually a fully translucent dome. The one above it is the one with the skylight where it has it just up in the top center section. So it would add to general light in an area. There's no debating that. If they wanted to go fully opaque, that's certainly usable. The only disadvantage is that you have to have the lights flipped on every time you go inside of a dome from an operational standpoint, as opposed to having the advantage of natural daylighting.
and is there any sort of cutoff then for light if you've got the skylight and you turn the lights on inside?
No, if the skylight is there, you will see the lights that have been turned on in the dome. So if light is a sensitivity, then the dome could be made fully opaque.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Schaefer.
Been promoted.
Demoted, excuse me.
Blessing and a curse. Bridget, now I lost it. On the engineering report, it says the football field is pervious, or it says that, I'm trying to understand, the football field's not changing at all. Is it just that it was an error in the report saying it was pervious? But we don't have, I'm confused about that. Can you help?
So was I, which is why it was in there. We reached out to MMSD and the previous engineer that's worked on the previous stormwater reports to make sure I was reading it correctly too. In the master stormwater plan, it is showing that football field as pervious. Now hearing that the field is artificial turf, has been there for 12 years, and that they're looking to replace it, we would be looking at the full drainage of the area, updating that stormwater master plan, and there may need to be additional stormwater controls as that area flips from pervious to impervious.
But not as a result of the dome.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, when you add the dome on top of that,
Yeah, then it
making
makes
sure that the watersheds match to how the field reacts to water in its current state, making sure that those aren't going to different basins, different areas, that the stormwater is still going where it was going before the dome was added to the top, because it is going to be there in rain, snow melt, things like that. So making sure that water still goes where it was planned to go.
By default, it makes it impervious because it's covering it, right? Okay. Thank you. Jack, can you go back to the picture that you showed that has the line of evergreens? Because you said those are only about 25 feet tall?
Yeah, that's an estimation. I mean, they may be a little bit higher, but these right here.
Would this rendering be incorrect then? Because the dome's supposed to be 52 feet. Those trees in this rendering look like they would block the dome. And if it's 52 and those are 25, is that accurate?
It might be just a little misleading from the photo and how it was taken. I don't believe they're 50 feet high, those trees. They
No,
might
I
be
don't
higher than
either.
20. It was an estimate, but they are pretty tall. I just, we didn't go out there and measure them in terms of height or anything
But
like
there's
that, so.
arborvitae and other trees there, so the arborvitae look like they're shorter, you can see them.
There's like two layers of it.
Two layers
They're
of
two
trees,
next
two
to
rows.
each other.
Okay.
I guess my point was, if, I don't feel any, I don't know that this proves or disproves, or it really has good bearing on what the neighbors will or will not be able to see if we don't, if it's a rendering, because to me, 52, I just don't know that it's accurate.
And that's no knock on anyone, I just don't want to hold it up and say, look, this will clearly cover the view of that dome, because I'm not sure it will, depending on the varying heights.
Other questions? So we'll go to a motion of some sort and then discussion. Anybody have a motion to make?
I would motion to approve per staff's recommendations, and before I finish my motion, I do have a question for staff.
Oh, ask a
So,
question.
because it's permitted, can we not put a time restraint on the lights?
Well, you can try. I mean, they can always appeal it, but I think in the past, as long as it's somewhat reasonable, I don't think it's an issue. So I guess I wouldn't be uncomfortable doing that as long as it's reasonable.
Okay, so I would like to add a midnight cutoff for the lighting to my motion, and as long as the applicant's okay with all the staff recommendations.
And which design?
I would like to stick with the opaque design.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Discussion.
Do we, just a quick question, do we need the light cutoff if it's opaque? I mean, how much light's coming, I mean, if it's opaque, is there any light coming through? There's no light coming through if it's opaque, so.
No, there was a choice between the opaque and
Yeah.
not the opaque.
He said opaque and a midnight cutoff, so I don't know what it,
Well, I don't think it'll be fully, I mean, it'll be
It's not
opaque,
clear.
but I think you'll still see, like you said, a low dim through that.
No, it'll be fully opaque. Opaque means no light comes through the fabric at all.
then I will retract my midnight request for that. I think the midnight thing may actually apply. What about sound, student athletes inside? You said you won't staff it after midnight anyway. So I'll leave my midnight on there for other reasons then.
Well, hold on. Were you done?
I'm good.
Okay, I think Commissioner Schaefer, either Commissioner Schaefer wants to go first.
Thank you. Can you go back to the rendering that you called it translucent, I think? So we don't have a visual of what the opaque would look like? So we don't have anything that we can look at and say, oh, this would be approximately what we would see on the Concordia campus. We only have the translucent and the skylight.
I think it's this one. Yep, it's-
Yeah, fully
I
opaque.
mean, at night.
Yeah,
I want to
at
see
night.
how opaque it is.
Well, if the applicant's saying it's fully opaque, then it should be just a white fabric. We shouldn't
Should.
see any light through there, so.
Correct.
And we
That-
can hold them to that, so if there is an issue with that.
Make that a condition of the motion.
Yeah, I'll explain. The opaque fabric has a black scrim layer, a layer in the middle of it that blocks out all light going through the fabric. So it's something we regularly use in different components, whether even in the skylight fabric, the sides are fully opaque. We do it from an energy standpoint. So with the invention of LED lights, it's made it more reasonable to have fully opaque domes. They just have to turn on the lights going in there. On the inside, it's a totally dark room, and on the outside, the one thing I'll say is a dome is curved. It's not like a conventional square building, so the sight lines are not diminished like a conventional building would. If you had a 40 or 52-foot high square brick building there, it would block your sight lines more than the curvature of a dome. So as you get 20, 30 feet in the air, the width of the dome that's 180 feet might only be, 70 feet at that point, and it's much less obtrusive than a square building would be.
Mr. Schaefer,
I suspect that,
microphone.
I suspect that rendering showing the dome is somewhat out of scale. If it's 52 feet high, those trees are not 52 feet high. I think those first arborvitaes are maybe 20, and the higher ones may be 30 to 35, but I think that's going to stick way above the trees. I know the designer's perspective is to kind of minimize the effect, but I think it's a lot greater than that is.
Mr. Parrish.
Hi, start off by thanking you for coming forward. I think Concordia is one of the biggest amenities we have as a community, so certainly appreciate the university. If you recall last time, I wasn't exactly in favor of the dome, called it some names. I won't be calling it tonight. So aside from the view, I think wanted to let you know I'd probably be in favor of eventually modifying the site plan if you were to do an enclosed permanent structure like a lot of, I think, universities do. I think it's a good long-term commitment to the campus and your sports program, and I think in many ways, I assume this is expensive, and we're never going to go down that path if you invest in this. But honestly, driving by it on the freeway and looking at it would bother me. I think I would regret voting in favor of it. So, but I do support the university, of course.
Any other comments? If you could call the roll, please.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer.
No.
Commissioner Parrish.
No.
Commissioner Stoker.
Yes.
Commissioner Lemke.
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer.
No.
Commissioner Chorin.
Yes.
Alderman Strelchek.
I know. No.
Mayor Worth.
Aye.
Vote passes 5-3, 3 noes. Oh, sorry, it's even, 4-4.
Well, unfortunately, it does not pass at a 4-4 vote. I thank you for coming. I'm disappointed that it's turned down, and good luck. Unless somebody who voted no changes their mind and brings a motion to reconsider, unfortunately, that is a denial. The next item on the agenda is the application for a 6-lot single-family subdivision for the property located at the southwest corner of Birchwood Lane and Hemlock Lane. Staff? If, Jack, are you taking this one?
Yes, I just want to get the plat up and some other data for us. This one. All right, here we go. So this is a request for rezoning recommendation, as well as preliminary plat and development agreement approval for a 6-lot subdivision at on the southwest corner of Hemlock and Birchwood. Total acreage is roughly 15.23 acres after the dedication of right-of-way. I do have some history in there, and I do have some other maps I can share. Basically, the colors aren't that great, but in front of you shows the zoning of the area. The parcel in question is in this location right here. I know it's difficult to read, but majority of the zoning in the surrounding area is R2 or R1B or R2B. So just a little bit of the history. Prior to 2000, a majority of this area was zoned at the 2.5 acre lot density. In 2000, the city went through a rezoning process where the entire city outside the sewer boundary was rezoned to a 5 acre minimum. And the result is a situation what we have here today, where we have a 5 acre zone parcel surrounded by lots of much smaller size. This was a policy issue discussed at the Common Council. In 2012, there was a couple of property owners that came forward and had rezonings done to the previous zoning, and one of them was Mr. Raymaker, which I believe his parcel is right here, as well as Mr. Bursch, which owns some property in this location here. At the time, the council was basically faced with the question, should we allow other properties to come forward at an individual basis, or we do a wholesale rezoning of the area in question? And at the time, it was decided that individual properties would come forward at their own request in terms of a rezoning, which is what we have here today. Like I said, from the map, I also have a map that shows the acreage of the surrounding area. As you can see, a majority of the lots range in size much smaller than the 5 acre minimum that the zoning requires. So it's hard for staff to argue against the rezoning in terms of compliance with the neighborhood densities. Most of the areas is again roughly in that 2 acre area. There are some larger lots and some actually a lot smaller than 2 acres. In terms of the overall land use pattern in this area, it's remained unchanged over the years. It's a pretty well-established neighborhood, with exception to some of the rezonings we've had recently, the Raymaker and the Burst one, as I spoke about. In terms of the plat itself, I have it on the screen. I'm just trying to shrink it down. It's a little too large to see, and I'm having trouble with reducing it. It's a 6-lot subdivision. They all meet the 2.5-acre minimums. In terms of frontage, there is no infrastructure being proposed for an additional road. There's access to Lake Shore, as well as Hemlock and Birchwood. Lot 5 is the only lot that is shown that does not have frontage on an existing road. The applicant is currently showing an easement that would run through Lot 1 to discharge on Hemlock. Staff's concern with that is that, number one, you're crossing through a wetland area to get to that access point. And so we would prefer a shared access way coming through this way and connecting with Lot 6 to eventually discharge onto Lakeshore Drive. There are a number of specimen trees located on the site. A majority of them are located along the southern property line. As you can see, the applicant has placed a 30-foot tree preservation easement along this area to avoid any issues with specimen trees. There's also a clump of specimen trees up in the, it's not on the screen, it's cut off, but up in this area, there's 3 arborvitae that are specimen, and we have a recommendation in there that they avoid those trees in accordance with the tree preservation ordinance. So in terms of the plat, other than that, staff is supportive. The applicant, I believe, had submitted an addendum after the packet went out after his neighborhood meeting. They agreed to increase the setback on this southern property line from 30, what the code requires, up to 50 feet to provide a larger buffer to the neighboring subdivision. There are, as you can see, there is a large wetland complex through the site. This all flows basically from east to west. The applicant will have to remain out of the wetland as well as the wetland setback. The area is full of a number of dead ash trees in the area. The applicant has stated that they will remove those as part of the development of the subdivision. So in addition to the preliminary plat, we have a development agreement. This would allow construction of 1 single-family home prior to final plat, and other conditions that protect the city in terms of development of the parcel. In terms of process, this is a rezoning. The rezoning will not take place at the Common Council for public hearing until November. So the development agreement and preliminary plat are basically on hold, and we will bring the development agreement to Common Council in November after action on the rezoning. Bridget's here to answer any questions with regard to stormwater. I know there was some correspondence with regard to the wells and the septic system, and she can answer any of those questions as well. Other than that, staff is supportive of the project and recommends approval according to the conditions in the report, with the addition of the 50-foot southern setback. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Did you want to talk now, Bridget, or do you want to wait?
I'll wait.
Okay, I forgot to ask the applicant to introduce themselves.
Good evening. My name is Fred Bursch. I'm with Bonnie Lake Real Estate. We are working with, well, next to me is Paul Apfelbach. Paul and I are working with the ownership group, which Linda De La Mora is here representing one of the 4 granddaughters or grandchildren that owns the property. And next to her is her sister, Bonnie Klamick.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
We do have a lot of people who have registered to speak. I'm first going to read off the people who suggested that they do not wish to speak. Harris and Heidi Ladd oppose the item but do not wish to speak. And I apologize if I butcher anybody's names. Nashit Mahdi opposes the application from Brentwood, not sure what lane, but opposes it and does not wish to speak. Amy Mahdi from Birchwood Lane, so I'm guessing the same place, opposes it and does not wish to speak. That's Nashit Mahdi again. Sarasa Prasad opposes it and does not wish to speak. Marjorie Horvat opposes the project, does not wish to speak. Gary Kastelik opposes the project and does not wish to speak. David Marget opposes the project and does not wish to speak. Frank Sandberg opposes the project, does not wish to speak. Louise Durnell opposes the project, does not wish to speak. Barbara Sandberg opposes the project, does not wish to speak. Tim Dunar opposes the project and does not wish to speak, and Louise Durnell opposes the project and does not wish to speak. We do have, I don't know, somewhere around a dozen people who wish to speak. I'd ask a couple of things. We allow people to speak. We want to hear people speak. But please, if somebody's already made the same exact point you're making, please don't belabor it. This could take an hour to get through this. We do have an ordinance that restricts presentations to 5 minutes. I'm hoping that people will respect that so that we all can get out of here at a reasonable time. And finally, this is a rezoning. It's not a personal matter. And our ordinances do require that you address your comments to the chair, not to the applicant, and that you are respectful and don't make this personal. The first person that I have registered to speak is Edward King of 13834 North Birchwood Lane. Mr. King.
Actually, that was supposed to be not registered to speak.
Oh,
I feel others can say things far more eloquently than I.
thank you, Mr. King. And next is Ann McDonald of 13826 North Birchwood Lane. She opposes the project and wishes to speak.
Good evening, and thank you for letting me speak. I have a number of concerns about this development, but one that I didn't even realize until I came to this meeting today. I have just recently retired from Concordia, where I worked for almost 19 years. And I happen to know their plans for further development north of where they're continuing and where they wanted to put up this dome. And if they can, their plan for their next however many years they're going to be there is for continued growth, to continue to add different programs, different majors, and to continue to build buildings, and they're very, very, of course, pro with their sports. So one of the reasons I didn't realize I was opposed to this development was how much we're going to need green space as Concordia continues to grow. And this is one of the last few parcels that will be available for us. I would like to keep this as green space. In fact, would even approach the sellers if they'd be interested in seeing the space referred as undeveloped. But in the light, if they're not, that's understandable as well. There are a couple of things that is a problem with 6 of these lots. As mentioned already by, I believe, the architect here, there is some real problem with runoff. I have seen Lakeshore Drive flood many a time after heavy storms. We live on a floodplain, and so that has to be taken into consideration. And so I really think more work needs to be done on stormwater reports and also potential contamination of well water. Another thing that was told as to why this is a benefit is that it would potentially provide more students for a public school. I've always been under the impression that the public schools were there for people who were there, not for us to contribute to them. I don't think it's a movie. If they build it, they will come. Anyway, the other argument I've heard was if it's zoned, it was zoned 2.5 acres originally, then it changes, we should send it back. That sort of thinking doesn't take into consideration of the fact that they decided there would permanently be no sewer or city water, and therefore they took into consideration some of the problems with that land in terms of stormwater runoff, et cetera. And finally, no, that's actually other people. Oh, yeah. No, that's about all I wanted to talk. There are other people who can mention other things, I think, in a lot better sense. But I think it's really important to realize that continued growth without maintaining some sort of green space really does not make a lot of sense. And I think you're going to be very sorry if you continue to let this happen. Thank you very much for your time.
The next person registered to speak is Theo Frankel. Mr. Frankel is registered to speak in support of and he lives on Bonnewell Road.
thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to be very brief.
Close to your, hold it up, if you could.
I live in the neighborhood for 2 years, and I know Mr. Bursch personally, and I know through just conversations I've had with him, the kind of responsible developer he is. And the reason I'm really here is because I came across 2 flyers that were submitted around the area that made personal attacks against Mr. Bursch about him being greedy and opportunistic, and the more houses, the more profit. And I would just ask, I know the Planning Commission and the council is going to stick to the basic facts of this case. Instead of having 3 5-acre homes, to have 6 2.5-acre homes. I just urge everyone in the community to take a deep breath, and as the council mentioned, not to make these personal attacks against the developers. We're not communists here, we're capitalists. There's nothing wrong with developing for a profit. Mr. Bursch, his prior projects, I'm aware of them. He could have asked for many more than 6 lots, but he kept it at 6 lots for a reason. And he considered the community. I live in the community. I believe that having 6 new families into the community is a benefit for the community. And I just urge everyone to take a deep breath and not make such outrageous personal attacks against the man who's been here and been a developer for decades. He has a wife, he has kids, he has a mother, and it was outrageous for me to read these flyers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Franco. Next person registered to speak is Matt Sullivan. He lives at Hemlock Lane. He opposes the project. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you for the Common Council members for donating your time to being here, because I know you guys all have something to do, like all of us. I guess nobody here had planned to come here on a Monday night after getting a little green slip in the mail saying, hey, there's going to be a public hearing, about the property across the street. I actually live on 350 Hemlock, which is facing my front yard is this whole development. All the ash trees, that's right down the middle of the wetlands. So how are they going to protect the wetlands if they're going in there with bulldozers or I guess people that are going to be clearing out those trees? Like, you have a big problem there. It's kind of a misstatement in my eyes, because that's where all the ash trees and some of the existing trees are. There's also maple trees along Hemlock, red and green. And I apologize, I'm not the best public speaker, so I'm going to do my best here. But I guess when it comes to supporting or opposing this lot, it's nothing personal. There's no personal attacks going on. Everybody has a right to be a capitalist, but so are all the residents here. We're all supporting our personal interests in our properties, just like many of you do in your homes. Our big concerns are verified in the fact that, it's all well waters, all septic. We take the matter to pump our own water and clean our own water out of the ground. We don't depend on the city to provide sewer. We don't depend on the city to provide water. So that responsibility is on us. It's on our dime. It's all responsible for us. I guess when my well went out in 2013, I had to basically move my well down to the bottom of the pit. So the next time the water is drained lower from the aquifer, I'm gonna be digging. And right now I'm at 68 feet on one of the shallower wells, so I'm more concerned with the surface contamination than probably anybody else. But you're looking at a pretty costly avenue. It was about $6,000 to go down and replace the well. It's gonna be closer to 10 or 15 the next time I have to replace it. So, if it's gonna be a result of draining the aquifer 10, 15 years from now, is that gonna be on me? I'm gonna be looking to say, hey, this is partly the result of overdevelopment in this area. I thought Mequon City had my back. So I guess that's a question that I have for the council, is who's gonna be responsible then the next time the well has to be replaced and the water is drained lower? I know you guys don't pay the pocketbooks of the city, but you sure have a responsibility to protect the city taxpayers, you know, and potential lawsuits that may come. And I'm not threatening a lawsuit. That's not what this is about. But I am concerned about the aquifer and the way that it is going to be drained. You know, that blue ribbon survey, or that commission that the city attorney had referenced. Has anybody read a copy of that on the council? That's a question that I have for you guys. From what I understand after talking to my alderman, you know, nobody had a copy in City Hall, and my alderman had to submit a copy to somebody on your board. And I think it was to you, Mayor John Worth. Mark Garrow, our alderman, gave you a copy personally of that report. Is that correct?
No.
No, it's not?
No, it's not correct.
Okay.
And I had a copy, and I've
Okay.
read it many times.
Okay.
And the three visions that came since, no, wait a minute, I shouldn't be commenting now, but this is for you to comment, we'll
That's
respond to
okay.
it afterwards.
You
but
you
thank
can interrupt me. Just be lenient on the fellow neighbors here. So I guess that's my question is, you know, what I come to understand after talking to people is that there's, you know, solid rock. There's no possible way you're going to get city sewer and water, or no easy way. Maybe it's possible, but it's not going to be easy or cost effective. So that, you know, the water and sewer, I may have made that point, that's going to be on us forever, you know, unless you guys are going to take some extraordinary measures to make that happen. You know, I guess that's kind of, when I looked at the Blue Ribbon Visioning Committee, there were 12 Mequon residents, Attorney James Friedman, developers, residents, and representatives of the sewer PAC, Mayor Christine Nurnberg, Director of Community Development Brad Steineke, and their mission was to address the effects of high-density development in areas not covered by city sewer and water. After a year and a half, the committee concluded that the area outside of the city water and sewer should be rezoned to an 5-acre minimum. And this was done to protect our sensitive and fragile aquifer. So that's why that community was there. And there's 12,000 acres of open land in Mequon. If you do this today and convert, you know, these last remaining, you know, if you go north on this map where it's not showing, you've got the horse farm, you've got the 77 acres along the freeway. Coming south, there's more land. So there is other territory up, or other parcels, I should say, in Mequon, just in this little area, you know, that are open space now, and that's part of the attract. That's why most of us moved up here. You know, I'm a resident in this area now almost 10 years. You know, I didn't want to be next door. You know, I wanted to live on acreage. You know, I may have a 2.5-acre lot like many of my neighbors, it looks like, but that was pre-2000 when the house was built. It was pre the rule change. And if I'm not mistaken, there was an opportunity for everybody to come forward in 2011. I think December 10th, 2010 to January 11th, 2011. Everybody had a chance to come in and say, hey, I was caught, you know, with a 5-acre lot. I want to readdress this and get a chance to make it 2.5 acres. This property owner had that opportunity at that time to make a case to convert it to 2.5, just like Fred Bursch did, and she chose not to at that time. So I guess my question is, why now? You know, what is the interest of the developers? You know, when they came down my driveway, they said, oh no, we're helping a friend, and I'm not trying to do any personal attacks. They had no interest, you know, we're gonna sell it to other developers to make the property. I guess, what's in it for them? That's another question that I have as a resident. Why are you even doing this? So I guess that's kind of what I like. You know, I wanna see Mequon stay open spaces. You know, I like living in the country. If I didn't wanna live in the country, I'd move to Cedarburg or Grafton or live somewhere downtown. You know, take my tax money there. You know, my neighbor just fire sold their house for $112 a square foot. You know, I guess if I'm gonna lose that appeal, the same thing could happen anywhere else. So, you know, I guess there's a lot on the line here. If you approve this one, there's 12,000 other acres that you're gonna have a hard time fighting against if you want to in the future. So if it's all about tax dollars and cramming as many homes in as possible, becoming Brookfield with, you know, houses stacked on top of each other, you know, I guess that's something you guys all have to consider on the Common Council. So I'll leave you with one parting thought, and I have copies for all of you. In short notice, on Saturday and Sunday, 15 out of the 17 homes that surround this property or that border up to it signed a petition that we can go, you know, this is obviously a preliminary petition, but they all signed and agreed that, you know, if it came to it, if it passes the Common Council today, you know, we can basically petition to have this, you know, overturned if we have to. Outside of that, just in 2 days, there are 38 homes included in this, of the 100 homes in 2 days that signed a petition saying they're not supportive of this. So I can distribute copies for all of you if you'd like to review the signatures.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
You're welcome.
The next person who registered to speak is Dr. Horwitz on Lakewood Drive. He opposes the project. Dr. Horwitz.
Thank you. My name is Fred Horwitz, and I and my wife and my family have been living on the bluff for 47 years. And I'm concerned about the bluff because while the surface water is going to be flowing to the west, I understand, on that property, we have no idea what's happening with the subsurface water, which is contributed to, for the most part, as I understand it, from septic systems. I am not a geologist, ear, nose, and throat doc, mostly retired, but I've been consulting with geologists almost from the day we first moved into this property. And I've been told with authority from him that we have no idea which way the subsurface water goes, and that the cause of bluff erosion is, for the most part, a result of subsurface water leaking out to the east. So I'm very concerned. In 2000, the law was changed to require 5 acres for property, and I assume that part of the reason that was done was because of this concern for bluff erosion, in addition to the aquifer. By building 6 homes in this area instead of just 3, using the current law, we're inviting a change in precedent, and the remaining properties will likewise be requested to go to 2.5 acres. This is going to add an awful lot of water to the subsurface area and increase the risks of bluff erosion much more than it already has occurred. I'm concerned about this. As I said, I've been there 47 years. I've seen bluff erosion to a large extent. Our property as well, even though we've left the trees up in our area in order to prevent that as much as possible. And I'm concerned. And I think we all should be concerned about it. So yes, I am opposed to this. I know Mr. Bursch and his family very well. I agree that he's an honest and forthright person, but I am concerned about the effects of adding not only the extra 3 homes in this particular area, but the precedent it sets for additional homes in the entire area that does not have sewer and water at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Horwitz. Next person registered to speak is Stephen DeGear of Hayden Court, and he would like to speak in support of the application.
Mr. Mayor, thanks for the opportunity to speak. We live on the west side.
Pull your microphone up closer, please. Yep. Thank you.
We're on the west side of Mequon. We're in a smaller lot. I support this project specifically, and in general, the city's move to provide smaller lots. We've lived here since '99. The 5-acre lot limit in our minds was a negative. We'd like to stay in the city as long as possible. We'd like to relocate from the west side, where most of the lots are bigger, to the east side, and we would be very interested in having smaller lots available. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DeGear. Next person registered to speak is Chuck Schmidt. He lives on Hemlock Lane. He opposes the project.
I'm Chuck Schmidt. I'm a neighbor to Matt Sullivan and to the west, the lot west. My 2 concerns address the water table. I'm down 360 feet with my well, and believe me, that costs a pretty penny to get it down that far. I'm concerned that the water table is going to get drawn down even further if we end up with 6 lots there. One other thing I don't think anybody else addressed, these are mound systems. Those mound systems have to percolate the effluent down into the soil. Now, I'm not a soil engineer, but I got to guess that eventually that's going to get into the water table. I'd rather have 3 buildings with mound systems than 6, doubling the ability for that effluent to find its way into the water table, and then of course the need for me to have to go even deeper. I have had to put in quite an expensive system to get rid of the water's potable, but it's not very drinkable. And I can't just but imagine what would happen if that water got any worse, what else I would have to add to it. So that's my comment on it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. The next person who registered to speak was Carol McCoy of Birchwood Lane, who opposes the project.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Many of the things that I was going to talk about have already been covered. I agree with my neighbors with respect to setting precedents. I think that we should follow the land use plan that's been developed. I have concerns too about the aquifer. And I guess the one thing that I would like to add that hasn't been covered very much yet is my concern about the wetlands on the property. I'm a wetland ecologist by training, historically. And, you know, wetlands provide a lot of functions, and even though the plan for the property, the development, is not to impair the wetlands, perhaps to cross them at one location, but to provide access by avoiding the wetlands, my experience with developments is that once the individual parcels are developed, oftentimes the landowner will fill and impair the wetland themselves when they are backed up against the wetland very tightly. And I guess I would offer that these 6 lots all abut the wetlands that bisect the property, not just in one linear fashion, but actually there's a fork. Well, you can't see it on this map, but there's just not a lot of room for several of the parcels with respect to the wetlands on the back side. And so I would just offer that I believe that in many cases the wetlands will be filled by the individual landowners to provide more yard, and that will affect water quality downstream. Wetlands provide functions that are very important, as many of you know, not just wildlife habitat and open space, which is valuable and cherished, but also groundwater recharge, water quality, and really something very important at this location, flood storage. I'm sure most of you here are aware of the flooding that has already been mentioned on Lake Shore. So I would just offer that information additionally as the reason that I oppose the 6 parcels, but I do not oppose 3 lots being developed. I think that that is a better layout for this property. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McCoy. The next person who registered to speak is Daniel Dunar on North Lakeshore Drive, and he opposes the project. Mr. Dunar.
Years ago, the Blue Ribbon Visioning Committee presented their findings and recommendations to the citizens of Mequon based on the extensive input of residents, developers, and experts. One of the major components of what would become Mequon's vision was the land use map. This map established a citywide blueprint for a clear development strategy that would accomplish the goal of controlled population growth while preserving and protecting the environment and keeping taxes low. 10 years later, Mequon again surveyed its residents to, in part, assess the effectiveness of this vision. Residents overwhelmingly reaffirmed the land use map. When asked about Mequon's land use policies, 49% of residents said the policies were perfect as is. Additionally, 33% believed that if anything, the policies should be even more restrictive. What's abundantly clear is that this strategy has been consistently effective and popular. Mequon's taxes remain low, and we have grown. But we have also protected the environment and the enviable quality of life that we Mequon residents enjoy. Today, we have a pair of opportunistic developers and a non-resident landowner with no stake in Mequon's future, who are requesting an exception to the land use policy to maximize a quick personal profit. But really, what they are doing, in effect, is challenging the validity of the land use map. If they are successful, they will have undermined a strategy that has protected Mequon's landscape and quality of life for over 20 years. The precedent they will have set will put the majority of Mequon's land area at risk for other opportunistic, vision-defying, resident-defying development. Today I ask you, as Mequon residents have done repeatedly every time they are asked, please reaffirm the Mequon land use strategy and reject the proposal to rezone this parcel of land. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dunar. Next person registered to speak is Dan Bradley. He opposes the project. Mr. Bradley.
I guess the advantage of being late in the number of speakers is that almost every subject I have down here has been touched, but I do want to clarify something about the report from the Blue Ribbon Visioning Committee. I may be the only one in this room that was on that committee for 18 months back in 1998 through 99, and we had a representative of Sewer Pack there, and we have the land use plan, and it was a very carefully reasoned out, scientific suggestion and recommendation to change the zoning. But as Jack mentioned something about the lot sizes around this property, it was also made clear during that time that existing lots like mine, which is 2 acres, which was formed in about 1978, were to remain as is and did not influence the future going forward. This policy was aimed at vacant land, not land that had residents on them. So I just thought I'd straighten that out. And all the other reasons that people have talked about, the water table, the septic systems, and so forth, are good reasons not to do it. But the absolute most important thing that's been said in here is the precedent. If we allow this one to go through, we did allow the Birch and the Raymaker properties, which I was highly involved in, Fred can attest to that, and we did allow those to go through because there was a difference in those two. They were residents at 2.5 acres, and they had their rights sort of taken away from them as residents to 5 acres. And yes, the reversion to 2.5, I thought was fair, ultimately fair. Even though we had protest petitions and we went through the whole deal against both of those, we at the end relented and said we're not going to push the issue any further. And I think it was a good decision. I consider Fred a friend of mine, Fred Birch a friend of mine. But I will say that we don't want to set a precedent for vacant lands and non-resident owners. For instance, those 77 or 72, I've heard different numbers, acres along the railroad tracks to be all chopped up into 2.5 acres with bound systems. Anyway, I do oppose the development, but not at 3 houses and the 5-acre zoning. I think it would be a wonderful area for that. And I hope that they have success with 3 homes, not with 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. And I believe the final person to register to speak is Sarah Kirkman Dwyer. She supports the project and wishes to speak. She lives on Birchwood Lane.
I could not be more nervous, so I'm terrified.
Take a deep breath.
Okay. I have lived in the neighborhood since 1992, so I'm a relative newcomer. I think the people who own this parcel on Hemlock, it's their property. Why those of us with 2.5 acres, 3, 4, can dictate that they have 5 is a little hypocritical. And I also don't believe that if you rezone this acre to 2.5 acres, that we're gonna have developers running willy-nilly through Mequon trying to do the exact same thing. These people, from what I understand, have owned the parcel since 1943. I would love to know who thought, oh, let's buy a parcel in the middle of nowhere in 1943. Now they're trying to sell it. They haven't lived there through no fault of their own. Doesn't bother me in the least. The proposal of 6 homes, I think, will be fine. I do hear a lot of fear about the water, about the aquifer. That's fear that we don't know what's going to happen. Fred and Paul have put so much thought and effort into this proposal that it looks like a beautiful proposal. I think that we're really coming at you out of fear. And I think we live in a beautiful area, and why wouldn't we want some more families to live in there? And we only live on 2.5 acres. You know, if I had to buy a 5-acre lot, we probably couldn't have afforded it. So I hope that you will strongly consider the plight of the landowners, rezone it per their request. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dwyer. We could turn back to staff for a minute, and if you could address, now I'm not speaking into the microphone. There were at least 3 or 4 issues I'd like you to address. The water table, the effluent into the groundwater, wetlands, and precedent setting and the 2000 survey, but we'll do that one last. If we can do the technical questions first.
Sure. There were a couple more that were brought up that I'd like to touch on that are pretty quick. One of the speakers indicated that there was floodplain on this parcel. There is not floodplain on this parcel, not at least FEMA-rated floodplain. There's also a question about stormwater runoff. You'll see in your packets and in the development agreement that stormwater management is required. They are required to show that the water leaving the site is no greater than the water leaving the site today, and in the same direction. So you couldn't increase in one direction and decrease in another direction and average it out. It's in the same directions as it's currently going. There also, as has been pointed out, there's wetlands throughout the site. There was a question about removing ash trees. They would be able to cut down the ash trees, but they would not be able to grind the stumps. If they went in and ground the stumps, that would be considered wetland disturbance, and they would have to get a special permit to do that. So there would not be bulldozers going through the wetland to remove these trees and tree stumps because they would not be able to disturb the wetland to do so. Again, not without the DNR approval.
And we put a restriction on the wetlands also that you can't disturb them, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
So jumping into the more heated topics that came up in multiple speakers this evening, the water table is something that is regulated by the DNR. Anytime that there is a well, it has to go through the DNR approval process. And if you want to turn your attention to packet page 167, item number 2 describes all of those requirements that the developer would have to establish for drilling a well. And for the folks in the audience who may not be have this in front of them, I'm going to read number 2D. Through the permitting process, the well digger must follow proper procedures with respect to the drown down effect on adjacent wells. So the well digger would have to go through and look at the effect to those adjacent wells. I do know that there have been some staff members that have reached out to well diggers in the area, as well as we reached out to our city water team to see what's changed since that blue ribbon study was done. We found out 2 key things as part of that process. The first is since the year 1999 or 1998, 1999, about 2,000 homes have been removed from the aquifer itself within the city of Mequon. Those homes are now on city water, so they are no longer drawing from that aquifer. In addition, Concordia used to be a large draw. They are now also on city water. So there has been significant reduction in those users of the aquifer since the study was done. Last and most importantly, we've also learned that the aquifer is approximately 160 feet or so deep in this area. So there's about 140, 150 feet of clay soils that any of the septic systems, any of the surface water would have to filter through before it came to the aquifer. We've also learned from those well diggers that the aquifer is very strong right now in this particular area. I think I've hit all of the key points from some of those
And what, the effluent into groundwater? I think you covered it, but only indirectly.
So the effluent, how septic system works is basically it filters the water through the ground. That's the effluent part, is the water that's being filtered. So it does have to go through about 140 feet of soil before it gets to the aquifer, and soil is effectively a filtering mechanism for that water. The septic systems, like the water systems for the private on-site sewage systems, is also monitored and permitted through Ozaukee County, and the permitting and maintenance process is pretty rigorous through them. So with each site, they do have to do perk testing. That perk testing, I have the report for it. It hasn't been submitted to Ozaukee County to verify the perk of the soil.
Thank you. And Mr. Zader, if you could address the process, the 2000 vision and how this all plays into that, and the precedent-setting nature of this.
Sure. Well, again, in 2000, I think if you look at I wasn't here at the time, and reviewing the visioning study and the minutes from the council meeting that eventually adopted the ordinance, I think there was some council members that were concerned about painting the whole city with a broad brush, and I think that's how we ended up in 2011 and 12 discussing this area, because I think a number of council members felt that this area is significantly different in terms of character than west on Wasaki Road and Bonnewell. There is a lot of area here that is covered by homes that are on a smaller size. So does that one size fits all policy make sense? And that's where there was a request by the Raymaker and the Bursch properties to go back to their previous zoning. And we talked about what would that mean in terms of precedence. So I think we're kind of down that path already a little bit. But in terms of the land use, I have the acreage map up in this general area, and I know there's discussion about the parcel up on Pioneer along the railroad tracks. I think that's a little bit different of an animal, but in this general area, here's the parcel in question. Other than that parcel in the general area, you have two properties along here that are about 6 and 5 acres in size, and you have one here that's about 10 acres in size. And then you can't see these are cut off. One of these property's already been rezoned ROE, and there's another one here. So you're talking about in this general area, you're talking maybe a handful of additional lots by going forward with the change. Again, there's the Concordia property and the property to the north of that. Those abut the freeway. Those are not in the same. I don't believe in the same kind of shape and stance as this property, where this one is completely surrounded by smaller lots. And as you go north, you do see larger 5-acre parcels. So in terms of a future process, it'd be nice if the commission and the council would adopt maybe a change to the overall land use plan to dictate which of those parcels we feel should be rezoned or could be rezoned based on a different land use plan. I think that would give the commission a bit more guidance. But in this general area, again, I don't think that you're looking at more than maybe 5 or 6 total lots that would be created by rezoning it from the R1 to the R1B.
And that's assuming all those owners
Want to do that, yes.
Thank you. I turn to the applicant and had staff address some of the issues. If you don't necessarily need to repeat everything they did, but you could address whatever you'd like to address, then we'll.
If we could start, Linda De La Mora, the spokesperson for the landowner, would like to speak for just a moment, and I beg the commission's pardon because she might get a little bit romantic as she introduces herself and her family.
If you'd prefer to stay at the table, you can.
This is fine.
Okay, thank you.
It's around one of a boxing match.
That's me.
I'm assuming at
I
the
was better
property.
as a baby.
At the property. Okay.
Yes. Good evening. I'm Linda De La Mora. I'm one of 4 owners of the 18-acre parcel. With me this evening is my sister Bonnie. We are four siblings who now own this property. I have another brother and another sister who are out of state. This property has been owned by my family for 76 years. In 1943, my maternal grandmother, Catherine McGovern Blix, and her sister, Frances McGovern Allison, first acquired the property. My grandmother grew up in Cedarburg. Her mother died while she was quite young. Her father was a country doctor, and my grandmother would tell me the stories about how her father would take her out in the horse and buggy into the countryside to visit his patients who were ill and couldn't come into his office. Our family always referred to the property as Betula, which is Latin for birch tree. And I understand they were prevalent at the time in the area, and there's some now probably, and Birchwood Lane, I'm sure, got its name from the birch trees, but it's always been Betula in my family. I was born in 1947, and what you saw is my parents' Christmas card, which I just dug out and blew up, and basically that's me as less than 1 year old. My parents would come out with my grandparents to picnic on the property, and so that's me sitting on a blanket at Betula. When my grandmother passed away in 1968, my mother, Patricia Schmidt, I don't know if I'm related or not to Mr. Schmidt over here who spoke, but my mother was an only child, and so she inherited the entire parcel. And eventually, my mother titled it with my father, Robert Schmidt, so it was the two of them, Robert and Patricia Schmidt. My mother held on to the property sentimentally. She hoped that someday some of her descendants would want to live there. That hasn't happened, but she felt it also would be a good investment. My mother passed away in 1996, and we four children received her half of the property. My father was the other half owner of the property. My father decided that it really should belong to the children and stay in the family line, and so he deeded the property to the four of us in fractional interest every year. And I know a petition went around that had pictures of lots of deeds, and that was my father over a period of years from 1998 to 2001, deeding it in fractional interest to the four kids using the annual exclusion until the four of us became the owners of it. I had a title report prepared. I have copies of it, and that I welcome anybody on the council or in the audience to take a copy of the title report that shows the 76 years of ownership in our family. I'm the eldest of the four children. I'm now 71 years old. My younger siblings are all in their late 60s, and we've discussed this property. My father just passed away a few months ago, and we decided that it was time that we did something about it, because we feel if it passes to the next generation, the fourth generation, there'd be too many owners and there'd be a potential for discord, and we just wouldn't want that to happen. So that's why we came forward and decided it was time to develop it for sale. We really didn't think that it makes sense to have a 5-acre parcel. There just aren't people looking for 5 acres to build a home on today, as far as I know. Bonnie and I live in Waukesha County. My brother and sister are out of state. We felt we needed a Mequon native who is familiar with the area and the history to represent us and assist us in developing this property. And so we were very happy to locate Fred and Paul. When we initially started working with Fred, we suggested that this should be divided into 10 parcels. We thought that looking at all the neighboring properties, 10 parcels would very easily fit in. They'd be more than 1.5 acres, and a lot of these properties were that size or smaller. Wisely, Fred counseled us that given the neighborhood, that a development of 2.5 acres would be consistent and compatible with the homes and lots in the area, and we did agree. I appreciate the opportunity to give you this background and be happy to answer any questions you might have. This has been really very dear to our family, but we just decided this is the time for us to move on, and I think there could be some very nice houses located on this property.
Thank you, Mr. DeLoar.
Just
she asked if there's questions, I had a question.
Well, we're going to have the applicant make their presentation, and then we'll ask questions. Mr. Bursch.
I'm going to stand, but I don't have any props or anything like that today, so.
And briefly.
Good evening. I can only stand for 3 minutes.
Okay.
I want to thank all of the people who came this evening to discuss the development plan for this vacant 18.59 acre parcel. My name is Fred Bursch. I'm a resident of Mequon, and I've been a resident in this neighborhood since 1992. My wife Karen and I raised our 4 children in this neighborhood. With me tonight is my development partner, Paul Apfelbach. Paul is also a resident of Mequon, having raised his 3 children in our city. You just met the landowner, Linda De La Mora, our partner in this land division and development. We are a real estate professional assisting a landowner in our community in the implementation of the development of her grandmother's legacy. As discussed in the staff report, this rezoning and land division needs to be evaluated based on its individual merits. We are requesting approval of R1B zoning, allowing the development of a 6-lot subdivision with a minimum lot size of 2.5 acres. This unique parcel is surrounded by single-family lots of comparable size to the 2.5 acre lots being proposed. Like the adjacent lots, these new homes will have septic mounds and private wells. We have performed soil testing to identify 6 acceptable mound sites. There are no new public improvements required as part of the subdivision. Additionally, this development will resolve the localized flooding at the northwest corner on Lakeshore Drive. This development proposal has addressed all of the necessary civil and environmental issues, including tree preservation, street trees, a $50,000 cistern contribution, wetland preservation, and stormwater management. There is no objective evidence that septic mounds and private wells on 2.5 acre lots will have any adverse public health or public safety impact. These new homes will be compatible and consistent with the existing neighborhood. We believe that they will enhance property values in this area. We do not believe that 3 larger 5-acre lots at this specific location are consistent with the character of previous lots and homes constructed in this neighborhood. We believe that there is a preference among many homeowners to own smaller, large lots. Lots in the 1.5 to 2.5 acre size range. Lots suitable for homes that are consistent with the majority of the homes already in this neighborhood. We believe that there is public survey data to support this statement. We have proposed the largest lots in this size range, consistent with the previous zoning. We also believe that there is support for land divisions on infill sites such as this. There are local neighbors and other Mequon residents who support this specific plan while also supporting larger lots in other areas of Mequon. As we stated earlier, please consider this land division on the basis of its unique individual merits. We hope that you support our request, and we look forward to addressing any specific questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bursch. Anything else from the applicant? Questions from the commission to staff or the applicant?
And one question, and I have comments later, as I understand your process. So
Okay.
I'm getting it now. It's new for everyone that's here. So, Ms. Lamora, one of the things I read was that in 2000, all the property owners were given the opportunity to essentially object to this zoning upgrade to 5 acres. Essentially would have given you maybe a foot in the door for today to say it bothered you then. And did you just not receive the notice? I mean, why didn't you say anything then?
You're going back to 2000. I really don't know what occurred in Mequon in 2000 in that regard.
Okay, well, I heard you say you wanted 10 acres, so I thought it would have bothered you then, so.
If I can add to that, in the neighborhood meetings that occurred in 2011, from spring of 2011 through 2012, which we have the attendance records for, Ms. De La Mora did attend the meeting that was held here at City Hall. And it was not her interpretation. Linda left out that her and her husband are attorneys. Her husband is a real estate attorney. They did not leave those meetings with the impression that there was a window of opportunity for a 30-day window of opportunity during which there were property owner rights that would somehow be rescinded after that 30-day opportunity. And they also did not understand that there was a residency obligation to, or squatting requirement associated with obtaining those rights.
Yes, I was at one meeting in 2011 because I did get a postcard and did attend, and I saw, them talking about possibly dividing lots more, but I didn't, see anything beyond that. My husband's a municipal attorney. He comes to meetings like this. He's in Rhinelander at a meeting this evening, but.
Thanks.
Ms. Schaefer.
I just want to clarify it. So, Bridget, I thought, maybe it's Mr. Bursch's question. These 6 lots, did they perk or not? All right, Fred's looking at me. According to the reports, they did. We do have Ozaukee County review all of those reports per their standards. They are the permitting agency, but based on the data that was provided, they did perk. Okay, when you gave your report, I thought it was still up in the air. It is not up in the air? I received the report this morning. Oh, well, how timely. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions before we turn it over to discuss the proposal? Hearing none, we can start with the discussion, we can start with the motion. Anybody want to lead off? Mr. Schaefer.
Well, I'm a little concerned that here we have.
Microphone.
Microphone. I'm a little concerned that this is going to set precedent. Just northwest of there, there's 77 acres plus other acreage, and I would hate to see 2.5-acre lots there. And I can just imagine if this goes to 2.5 acres, that will go to 2.5 acres. Therefore, I just can't support it. Thanks.
Ms. Schaefer.
Can we confirm the process for the folks here? Because it's rezoning. I feel like just that we've been addressed as we're not the final say in the rezoning.
No, I mean, just so everybody knows, this is at best, we make a recommendation to the council. The council will have 2 readings, and then we'll pass a rezoning ordinance. So this isn't a decision tonight on this application. It's a recommendation to the council, unless somehow Jack wants to correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's correct.
I just feel like
Yeah.
having sat in those seats and not understood that process, and then I heard a couple people mention council, we're appointed, the council is the elected officials, and any rezoning request has to be officially approved there.
So this whole process will likely repeat itself in November or December, based on scheduling, where there will be in the public hearing, Jack or Kim, that would be likely at that meeting?
At November meeting.
At the November or the December meeting, depending on scheduling. There would be a public hearing where people have an opportunity to speak. I and Alderman Strelchek would be the only people up here who would be at that meeting. There will be probably likely 6 aldermen who join us because we have 1 vacancy. And there would need to be a vote at that meeting for rezoning the property. Tonight, it's only a recommendation to the Common Council. Other comments?
Are you done?
I know, but I need to collect myself. You go ahead.
Question.
Alderman Strelchek.
Jack, can you just show us on a map what the surrounding properties are as far as lot sizes?
Sure.
Because as we're getting into the discussion and we're hearing that several of the surrounding properties are at the 2.5 or below.
Sure, here you go. So this is, I zoomed in just to get a better handle on it. So this is the property in question. Properties across the street on Hemlock are 2.3, 1.6, 2.2, 2. All the stuff along Lakeshore ranges between, looks like about 2.7 up to about 4.6. This bank right here is roughly 1.9, 3.4. So this is the general area. As you go to the west, these 2 parcels are zoned, are larger. This property to the south, which is cut off on this map, is larger. It was approved for a land division a number of years ago, but the applicant had some issues with crossing a wetland, and I don't know where it's kind of floundered since then. But this is basically the general area.
I hear what all the residents are saying, and I do have concern and empathy for what you bring forward. I guess what I struggle with as a commissioner here and a council member, on council, and I'll obviously, I'll be hearing what you have to say again in future meetings, regardless of which way, well, if this does move forward today, I'll hear about it. With the surrounding properties at 2 acres, and the variable difference of the homes being from 3 home sites on 5 acres to 6 allowable on 2.5 or larger. I struggle with the idea of what we've done as a city and a municipality is we've actually spot zoned this property to make it something that's not consistent with the neighboring parcels. I'm confident with the wells from everything that I've seen up here and engineering reports and the process that I know the DNR is going to go through, that your aquifer isn't going to be depleted. Also with what Bridget brought forward, that 2,000 homes have come off that aquifer and plus Concordia. 140 feet through clay is a really good filter going into the water level. I'm currently, I may be on 5 acre density, but I'm on a 2.6 acre lot, which is just right in this lot size. I'm close enough to my neighbors, but I'm far enough away that I still have privacy from everybody else. Giving the neighbors that are existing there their privacy, but also giving the new residents their privacy as well. I don't see the precedent being set for the parcel further north because it's not surrounded by sub 2 acre to a couple 3 acre parcels along the lake. I'm leaning towards support of this at this point. I'll obviously listen to what the fellow commissioners have to say.
Commissioner Parrish.
Sure, thank you. Normally I just babble, but tonight I prepared some remarks for my planning commission members, so I'm more organized. The mayor in his wisdom established the policy subcommittee because the planning commission has found itself in a time-consuming pattern of granting variances and changing zoning in an inconsistent way. This situation is similar in some ways and sets dangerous precedent and a slippery slope in my opinion, as we are constantly trying to avoid here at Planning Commission every meeting. In his first subcommittee meeting early August 2019, the mayor announced the following policy initiatives for the subcommittee to work on, which I am not sure you are all aware. East Growth, which is all the way up to Northport Road, the entire Port Washington Road corridor and a deep dive of it, a review of the citywide survey results, conservation subdivision zoning regulations, and the Lake Michigan zoning regulations. All of these directly or indirectly tied to tonight, even though some of those are outside the Port Road corridor. I agree the mass rezone in 2000 did not appear to be done strategically. It may have harmed some property owners. However, it was clearly done with reason. It was the result of a comprehensive and generally accurate community vision document from 1999 that has lots of interesting and non-related recommendations and policy suggestions, which I encourage us to review eventually, which was then followed by a 2010 vision document, which had, in my opinion, an even better tone and updated and somewhat better recommendations. However, I really don't see where the 5 acre decision was reversed based on community support other than Kim's memo to Common Council, which is reasonable in my opinion, but did not establish a full process and sets of criteria for these reversions other than identify that property owners had the right to rezone and so on. If we don't table it tonight, I'm going to ask we do an amendment that states approving the subdivision is not an implied approval for the other 130 vacant acres in this subdivision. Essentially, the 130 acres equates to a difference of 30 extra homes in this neighborhood from my own calculations. So it's a difference between 28 and 58 homes when you look at the area. Not seeing the vision reports before tonight's meeting was problematic, and I certainly appreciate staff forwarding you the 99 report per my request. The mayor was able to find a 2010 document, as I mentioned, which was even better, and I'd like to request, Robin, if you could send that out to the Planning Commission. We had no background before tonight about how the 5 acre zoning policy came to be, and so these documents would have addressed that knowledge gap. It would seem that approving this parcel conversion might imply Planning Commission will allow the rest of the 130 acres of land east of I-43 to revert back also, which could alter the highest and best use dynamic along Port Washington Road and challenge its resources. On Port Road, just so you all know, we may very well want to allow houses with well and septic, or at least until the city or services are available there. This is going all the way down from Bonnewell to Pioneer. We're looking at land use right now. That leads to the whole well, septic, and aquifer capacity discussion, which we are currently researching and discussing at the committee level. There's very limited information about these capacities, and I actually liked what Bridget had to say today, and I would like to memorialize some of that with paperwork so that we have some documentation about what we're saying here. If there is a shortage of information at this next subcommittee meeting, I would suggest that we contact geological engineers, sewer pack, WDNR, all the well drillers, which was a good move, appreciate that, septic system contractors, and so on. I don't see how we otherwise assure homeowners there are sufficient resources. Just so you know, I am open-minded to the Birch deal after we have a fair process in place to establish that we aren't adversely affecting neighborhoods, sticking to our word, and honoring past leaders and volunteers with their recommendation. Honestly, what's the point of doing all this otherwise? We're volunteers up here. I think we can establish a process and criteria somewhat quickly after a few subcommittee meetings with minimal delays to Birch. And it's not like the homes are gonna break ground this winter anyways. They're gonna be this spring. Case-by-case reversions may be appropriate based on an established process based on facts and research, which is fair to past and current owners. For example, it may very well be that there is capacity here, defined by experts, for the Birch site, but not the other 3 130-acre sites in the neighborhood. So again, this becomes a question of 28 new homes in this neighborhood versus 58. The delta of 30 extra homes is a huge policy decision and a strain, potentially, on limited resources. So in closing, we have 4 options. 1, we can approve tonight per staff's recommendations. 2, we can approve per staff recommendations. However, I'd really like to see an amendment in there that in no way does this approval give implied approval for the other large parcels east of I-43 outside of the sewerage district. Option 3, we could vote to deny, or option 4 is a vote to table so the policy committee can do its job and come back with a recommendation on land use and additional information so you can make educated decisions. Thank you.
I think I'll speak next. I was not on the council in 2000, but I joined the council shortly thereafter. So the rest of the history since that date, I either was directly part of or even during a short gap period in my aldermanic tenure, I paid pretty close attention and I have the background. The 2000 vision, based on the 1999 survey, has largely directed the city, but not entirely. There have been deviations, intentional policy-driven deviations since then, including based on the subsequent survey, a rejection of the concept of going out and buying up 2,000 acres of land for permanent preservation. The recommendation in 2000 is not a city plan. It was a recommendation by a well-meaning, very qualified committee that made sense at that time. And while I buy much of that plan, and it's part of my concern about Port Washington Road, I also recognize that the rezoning done in 2000 was done with a sledgehammer, not with a scalpel. And affected properties that maybe if looked at individually, it didn't make sense. And again, that was a recommendation from, it's a non-binding vision by a group of qualified appointees, but not done through the process that this body's here for, or the Common Council, who's elected, a third every single year, and the 6 mayors that have been elected since that date. And really, that is why we have those elections, to make those kinds of decisions. And this isn't the constitution of the city of Mequon. It was a vision by a group that has been largely followed. I think when you look at individual properties, and you have to look at individual areas, you first of all, part of the due process, the right is of an applicant is to request a change. The right of the public is to speak up and say, I don't want that change. Ultimately, our job is to make a recommendation to the council based on the available information. Is this good planning? I mean, that's why we're the planning commission. Not necessarily, you may say that we want to follow the 2000 vision or the 2010, they called it vision, but it really was written in 2005, or some other thing, but to make a best case planning decision based on what we see. For me, where the best planning always takes into consideration the property that surrounds a property to make sure that you don't have incompatible uses, but there are delineations. I think that the land up near the expressway is a very different parcel. It's not surrounded by these smaller parcels. And I think that makes that a very different discussion. I think the policy subcommittee if this body insists on it, we can send this and add that to its agenda. But this isn't part of the agenda. The agenda was the Port Washington Road Corridor, the East Growth Area. This is neither of those, because when the East Growth Area was defined, there was a specific decision to exclude this for a couple different reasons. One, there's not, in the big scheme of the city, there's not a lot of land available here. Now, there are a couple big parcels which have unique characteristics. But the city has looked at, and in a number of instances around the city, and by the way, somebody accused the applicant of coming up with this pejorative term infill site. It's not, it's a term used by staff and by the council and the planning commission over the last decade of looking at individual properties that may be zoned in a way that's not consistent with the surrounding properties. This is one of those parcels. So whether or not the applicant or the owner came and spoke 10 years ago and understood her rights, or somebody protested 20 years ago, our job is to look at it today and say, is it consistent with the city on a macro basis, what we want to see, and on a micro basis? Is it good for that neighborhood? And to be fair, I just don't understand how we can look at this parcel and say, I've listened carefully. I talked to a well digger today who says that's one of the strongest aquifers in the city. It's one of the greatest bodies of water in the city. And anybody who thinks that effluent can seep down, that far, goes in the face of all well science, because everybody in the city who's got a septic system or a mound then is at risk of drinking poop. But we're not. And I lived with 20 years with a well and septic. None of these people have, at risk that their groundwater, because of their own septic systems or mounds, are at risk. There's pretty objective facts here about the science behind it, and we have very strong rules to make sure we're not causing groundwater problems. The state has very strong, and that we're not causing runoff. The state has very strong rules about water systems and septic or waste management systems. The question before us is this on a macro basis a bad idea or a good idea? And is it on a micro basis, looking at this specific parcel surrounded by it, a bad idea and good idea? The rest of it, like all other developments, are dealt with by all the standards. Now, I don't know how, I agree with the keeping 5 acres for the vast majority of our open space on the north and west sides of Mequon. That doesn't mean every place. We have a central growth area for a reason. We look at the east growth area for a reason. But most of that 10,000 acres that's left, I think that they exercised good vision back in 2000. But for this individual parcel, it's fear. I do not believe that individual property owners who live across the street, who live on 2.5-acre lots, think that they're cramped in, nor will I believe that when this is done, that somehow this will alter the character of the neighborhood. In fact, it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood. So for that reason, when I get to vote tonight, I'll vote for this. I don't get a vote at the Common Council, but I'm hoping we pass this. I don't mind the addition that you want to add as an amendment, because I do think that those other parcels, the ones Jack pointed out, are in this same boat. We ought to, as a planning commission, take them up all at once and say, is this good planning or not good planning? But the decision in 2012, because the Common Council was frankly lazy and didn't want to take, it's easier to kick the can down the road, said, let's do this on a case-by-case basis. We have 2 applicants in front of us. We'll give it to the 2 applicants. This should be rezoned to be consistent with the neighborhood. Yeah, certainly, we shouldn't rezone anybody who doesn't want to. If somebody has a 10-acre parcel, wants to keep a 10-acre parcel, they get to keep their 10-acre parcel. But there is no good planning reason why we wouldn't rezone this. Alderman Strelchak.
I'd like to make a motion for approval with the clear statement that this does not set a precedent for any of the neighboring parcels.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Additional kind of discussion.
I'm going to vote against that motion and just want to explain why. And I agree, you're a tough act to follow, Mayor Worth, because you spoke off the cuff and you spoke very well, and I tend to get a little caught up in my own thoughts. But the bottom line is, we have an obligation when we sit and look at a rezoning request. If we are going to deny it legally, we have to be careful about why we're denying it. It can't be just because we don't like it and we don't feel good about it. It has to be, we have to consider, is this rezoning consistent with the existing and surrounding land use designations? And I would say it is. It is both in its current state and in its proposed state, right? It could be 5 acres and be consistent, and it could be 2.5 acres and it would still be consistent. So either way, it's consistent. Are there reasonable uses? Yes, you could build 3 houses there without anyone having come forward. They could have built the 3 houses. That's how it's currently zoned. So that's consistent. Has there been a change in character or trend in the area proposal? So this is where I'm going out on a little limb, but this is where I'm going to hang my vote against this. I feel like many times when we have these contested topics, I struggle with the landowner rights and the neighbor rights. And over time, I've come to realize that I don't understand developers and builders, and they don't understand me. And I had a discussion, not with anyone in this room, but a different developer who was talking about, he said, you've got this field and you could make it a beautiful subdivision. And I said, well, I think if you flipped the adjectives, then we're talking, but I don't see it the same way. Beautiful field or subdivision. That's probably why I'm not a developer or a builder. I think where I'm hanging my hat is the fact that we talked about the rural character that we have in Mequon, and I would say many of the neighbors purchased their properties, or their properties were there prior to this zoning, and I believe that having 6 additional homes versus 3 additional homes, to them, it sounds like it makes a big difference from how they perceive the character of their neighborhood. And I understand that, because I would feel that same way. So I believe that changing this, and all the other discussions about what the visioning was, how people, how people interpreted it, whether it's our law or something that we're just considering by a group that was created by a group of well-intended and well-educated and informed citizens. I think the thing that kept coming back to is that many of us moved here for the rural character, and that's going to mean different things to different people. But the fact that there's so many people sitting in this room that oppose it, I think that what this would do to their neighborhood, it flies in the face of what they might perceive to be the rural character of Mequon. So I'm opposed.
Just a quick comment, kind of as opposed to that, is I think this is efficient land use. 6 houses here makes sense. They're still 2.5 acre lots. Those are still large lots. It fits the neighborhood. And if you figure 6 houses are gonna get built somewhere, I'd rather put 6 houses here and still have the field somewhere. You put 3 houses here, you're gonna use up 15 acres land somewhere else to put those additional 3 houses someday. People are still gonna move in. I think this is efficient to put the 6 houses here because it fits with the neighborhood.
Alderman Strelczyk.
I'm just going to be really kind of brief on this. I think what the city did in 2000 is they took away the landowner's rights. This was zoned 2.5 acres. That was consistent with the zoning and the vision prior to that point. They came forward with a policy that was a broad brushstroke policy. Let me talk about in specifically why I support this versus 2.5 and everywhere else in Mequon. This is surrounded by approximately 2.5 acre lot sizes. Surrounded, all 4 sides. That's the definition of spot zoning. I don't know why the city did that back in the first place. I just don't know that that is the appropriate thing to have been done in this situation. The landowner bought the land in what year, ma'am?
1943.
Okay, so
There was no zoning then, so.
right. So where there was no zoning, they've had the land since before my dad was born. And she finally wants to sell it because there's several kids and they don't want it to go to the next generation. I'm dealing with that in my family right now. It's a horrible process. I'm sure that if she felt that she could picnic there for another 20 years with kids and grandkids, that you'd enjoy it. But sometimes it's just time to move on from a property. She was zoned 2.5 acres. It was switched on a broad brushstroke policy decision to go to 5 acres, mainly just because development was getting a little out of control for a period of time in Mequon, and they needed to stall it down, and we had the water issues. We've gotten reports from well diggers that the aquifer is strong there. As recently today, I know the individual personally. I trust him. He would do my well. He would do any ones that I would recommend it to. He's the best in the city. He's been doing it in this municipality and other municipalities for years. He has no reason to say anything different. I don't see this as a greed issue. I see this as a issue that they really just kind of want the property zoned to what it would be for the neighboring properties. I just don't know how in my mind that I can vote to keep something 5 acres when it's literally surrounded by 2.5 acre parcels. Now, if it's another property that's further north that's abutting up against something else, you know, what I don't like is zoning creep, okay? So like if this property was on a fringe and there were 5 acre parcels next to it and 2.5 acres on the other side, I would be equally as adamant to keep it at 5 because I don't think zoning creep should happen. I think we should keep what it is consistent with the area. But all of you residents, I hear your concern and I understand your worry. I'm confident that it's going to be done right. I'm confident that you're not going to have issues with groundwater or wells. I'm confident that it's consistent with what your homes are currently. And I'm confident that this is going to be a quality development and it's going to fit exactly with the surroundings. I'm voting in favor of this.
Any other comments? I would add one thing. Those standards that are written here, just to be clear so nobody has a misapprehension, when we're talking about conditional uses, we have to follow and be careful because there are requirements. Rezonings, there are no requirements. I mean, we can deny a rezoning for any reason and can agree to a rezoning other than fraud, taking payoffs, but any ethical reason. So these standards are simply things that staff says, these might be things you consider. There is no need to be careful because rezoning is a legislative decision that's within the discretion of the Common Council and can be recommended by us. So in rezonings, never feel cautious because you want the city to do well, not cautious because of legal concerns. Any other discussion? If you call the roll, please, on the motion.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer.
No.
Commissioner Parrish.
No.
Commissioner Lemke.
Yes.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer.
No.
Commissioner Chorin.
Yes.
Commissioner Baca.
Yes.
Alderman Strelchak,
Yes.
Mayor Worth.
Yes. That passes 5-3.
5-3.
Congratulations, we thank you. We'll hear from everybody again in a couple of months. Our next meeting is Monday, October 7th at 6:00 p.m. And this is ripe for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
None against.